It is time. Welcome to today's webinar on empowering the consultative agent, brought to you by CCW Digital and TaskUs. I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW, and your host for today's discussion. In our just released market study on modernizing service experiences with AI and digital, we revealed that 95% of contact center leaders believe the rise of AI will prompt agents to spend more time on complex interactions. And a similar amount say they're going to spend more time dealing with emotionally hostile customers. Now, we've previously revealed that 60% of leaders believe that teams will almost exclusively be focusing on these more complex, more personalized, more emotionally charged interactions in the future. Now, typically, this is presented as good news, right? I mean, no employees are begging to take on those repetitive questions. No employees are begging to read scripted answers about payment due dates or forgotten passwords. So clearly, if we can say you're going to deal with more personalized, more conversational, more consultative interactions, that should be appealing, right? But here's the problem. We often forget that just the good in all this, the exciting part of all this, that's not automatic. The truth is, there will be a journey for our teams to become more consultative agents. Our employees are going to need more skills, are going to need new competencies, and businesses and leaders are going to have to actually empower them with new tools, new technologies, new data. They're also going to have to rework the overall culture and the overall employee experience to ensure they're supporting a future where the agent is not a script reader bound by very rigid efficiency metrics, but is instead one empowered to make a real impact, to make a real connection. Now, as much as the impact of technology is changing workflow, we also know that we want to be focusing on augmenting employees with technology. We know that we have to build fluency and comfort with AI. We have to use automation to target parts of the agent experience that stand in the way of making the agent more empowered and stand in the way of making them more human. So in this webinar, we're going to be tackling all these questions. We're going to look at what exactly is changing about the agent role and why those changes are so important. We're then going to understand the role we play as contact center and business leaders in actually empowering that future. Now, as a reminder, this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to relive the experience at any time, and you can ask questions at any time using the console on your screen. Without further ado, let's meet our speakers. So Joe's here from TaskUs. Thrilled to have you here, Joe. Before we dive into what's going to be a great discussion, we want to get to know you. So tell us about yourself, your background, and your company.
Well, Brian, first off, thanks for having me on. I have the pleasure of leading TaskUs professional services and digital transformation practice. We advise our clients on how to embed technology to empower their teammates and their agents to better serve customers. Ultimately, it starts with that, what should the customer journey be? And then we pair the agent journey and supporting technology. I've been in this position for the last 5 years. My background is in the management consulting space, and really excited to be here to talk more about the evolution of the agent, how our teammates at TaskUs are augmented by AI, and what the future looks like for them.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about what you just said there is it all is rooted in designing the right customer experience, right? I know we say that, happy agents equal happy customers. We say that it starts with a great employee experience. And obviously, to a very strong sense, that's true. But we have to remember that the experiences we're designing, the happy agents we're trying to create, they have to be the right agents for our customers. They have to be the right agent for the vision we're trying to create. And so if we don't set the right standard for what does a good customer interaction look like? What are our support interactions all about? What kind of connection are we trying to do? Then we're never going to be making the right employee experience decisions. We're never going to be hiring the right people. We're never going to be training the right people. So again, yes, it's true that our employees play such a role in executing the experience, but it's the customers and their intentions and their sentiments and their goals that dictate what we're trying to execute in the first place.
Absolutely, Brian. And it's really about helping agents or teammates, as we call them at TaskUs, to be able to understand what customers' true intentions or issues might be. Oftentimes, now that AI and technology has taken on automating the simple tier 0, tier 1 contact types, when a human picks that up, there needs to be that seamless transition so that a human understands where a customer is coming in from, what their journey has been to that point, and how they can be most effective in helping them resolve a particular issue going forward or getting a customer the information they need.
Yeah, and I know that the context of the customer's journey, the relevance of the customer's sentiment, and how that drives agent behavior will certainly be something that we explore throughout this discussion. But I want to start at the very top, which is really detailing how the role of the agent has evolved. We've heard about the evolution of the agent role, we've heard about the new normal, we've heard about next generation work. But to start us off here, from your perspective, what changes have you seen? How has that agent role evolved?
Well, Brian, I think you mentioned it best in those statistics in your introduction. It's becoming more consultative. It's having to take on those more complex interactions, ones that require a much higher degree of judgment, going beyond following the script and adhering to the process to achieve a perfect QA score. And instead, understanding, why is a customer really frustrated, applying the right level of EQ to understand, and then having the latitude, as you mentioned, to address the issue. Um, so often we see that there is a focus on following a particular policy or process as written, and that serves to generate an efficient result, but it may not always go beyond to delight the customer. And so we see organizations that have a true customer focus and have those highest CSAT and NPS scores. They give their agents the autonomy to kind of go beyond in decision making and do what's right by the customer in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to think about this, right? Because we know that we're always trying to emphasize human connections. And the second you make an agent follow a very rigid robotic process is the second you essentially take the human out of them. And why are we relying on these people? Why are we saying that happy agents equal happy customers? Why are we thinking about their sentiment if ultimately we're not going to let them be human and let them make that connection? So really starting to shift our thinking from these are people who fill seats, read scripts, and answer an X number of calls in a certain hour to these are people who really hear customers and really adapt to them and then really deliver the right resolution befitting both what the customer wants and also who our brand is. That's going to be really exciting. But one of the mistakes, I think most would agree with you out there. I mean, I shared the data. Most do agree that that is where we want to go. But when we start to actually operationalize this, one of the big mistakes or challenges is figuring out exactly how we delineate these roles, right? Because it's easy to say, oh, AI for simple, humans for complex. But we know there's a lot of nuance when it comes to determining what exactly is a simple issue, what exactly is a complex issue. I gave that one example of the forgotten password. I think that's the cliche everyone uses. I think we could probably agree a forgotten password is probably a pretty textbook simple issue, but certainly, we're not just going to invest a lot of money in AI just to help people reset passwords. And we're not going to, expect agents to literally do every other interaction. So we're going to need more of a rubric, more of a framework for deciding when is automation the right answer? When is human ingenuity the right answer? Whether it's your perspective, TaskUs's perspective, or just the industry's perspective at large, how do you think about that delineation there?
Yeah, Brian, I think first off, consumers are becoming more and more accustomed to self-serving. We see it in the grocery store every day, going through the automated checkout lines. It's just becoming the new norm. And so when it comes to interacting with a support function in an organization, consumers are typically fine with self-serving, except when the technology breaks down. There might be some bug that's preventing the password reset from working. Those simple contact types, there's still going to be a portion of them that require some human support, much more so on the complex side. I think that goes without saying. But it's really about being careful with the technology design so that you don't introduce unnecessary friction that frustrates a consumer before they can get to a human. A consumer is willing to self-serve to a point, but as soon as that frustration kicks in, then that's when a human has to step in, ideally before that point even, so that the interaction isn't that highly emotionally charged one that we head off that frustration before it happens. I see on a regular basis, chatbots will maybe try once or twice to keep that contained even if somebody is typing in agent, speak to a human, speak to a person, and having to type that in 3 or 4 times, um, that raises the emotional level of the interaction and the point that the human is coming in at.
Yeah, and I think the way we think about it is, a lot of times when we talk about self-service, it's chatbots, it's conversational IVRs, it's a more interactive experience. But the truth is, self-service begins long before that. It begins when they run that Google search, when they look at your website, when they go through the FAQ page, when they read the instruction manual. They're trying, the ideal customer doesn't interact at all. They just get the answer right in front of them. So when they come time to interact, it's because they're essentially saying that what was out there, the static information, either wasn't clear, didn't feel like it applied to my issue, or didn't give me the outcome I was looking for. So when they then move into the chatbot, they move into the AI agent or the conversational experience, they're expecting more clarity. They're expecting more resolve. And if they don't get that there, then when they reach the live agent, they're definitely expecting that person to really adapt to them as a human. And so I think you really have to understand that there and basically understand what types of issues might not be easily addressable by here's a line of text we're going to put in the website, but instead are going to really require true listening to why this matters to them, and then true listening to how a unique resolution or just a better explained resolution can really satisfy their goal. And that's really what I see as the role of the human moving forward is not necessarily being someone who just knows all the policies or knows how to look information up, but instead someone who knows where the gaps are, who can identify when the policy does not seem to be meshing well with what the customer is looking for. And they can kind of play that translator role, if you will, in saying, I know how you feel. You don't like what we're saying here. Here's what we're going to do about it. And that doesn't mean, oh, the agent's just giving customers $1 million when they're upset. What it does mean is showing, as someone who's a person with feelings who gets this, here's how we can make sense of the situation. But I think we've done a good job of starting to unpack the way we're describing these roles. We've used the term consultative. We've talked about, emotional empathy and connection, but there's also the idea of success, right? Because, we can't just say agents are going to be humans and humans are all different and we're just going to like let that happen. We obviously need some sense of structure. We need some sense of barometer for what a successful agent looks like. Back in the traditional contact center days, we had one vision. As we see the agent become more consultative, I'd imagine that vision is going to change. So, from your perspective, when you think about that prototypical agent, what they do well, what those keys to success are, how are those evolving moving forward?
Right. And Brian, the traditional contact center metrics are, you know, uh, productivity, handle time, QA scores. It's all about just go follow the process. How quickly can you do that? Have you checked all the boxes to get everything right on a QA scorecard? The shift has already started to happen to move toward metrics like CSAT or NPS. And of course, those measure different things. We can unpack kind of the methodology behind those, but it's really around, are customers satisfied? The good contact centers out there in the world have already started to blend those in. But one thing that I think goes without saying, I'll mention it anyway, is that the way we look at those metrics shifts. It used to be that all of those tier 0, tier 1 simple contact types generated great QA scores. They're easy to solve, or excuse me, great CSAT scores. They're easy to solve for. People are happy if you can help them reset their password. But now that people are dealing with more emotionally charged situations, more complex contact types, the way in which we evaluate CSAT, I think, has to change. Customers are entering that human interaction coming from a little bit different place. So, I think we need to acknowledge that and look for how can we continue to enable our humans to push the boundaries when it comes to serving customers, but also staying within the bounds of the policies. So I think, the policies have to be in place. Like you mentioned, we can't go handing out $1 million refunds to everyone, but I think it's about how we communicate the policies. If there is latitude to communicate a refund, making a customer feel like their need is met with how we process that, how we communicate that we have done something kind of above and beyond for them, leaves them with a much more positive feeling at the end of the day, rather than having them struggle to get there.
Yeah, and I think I have a natural next question to this, which is how do we actually enable that, right? Because, it's easy to say, we often hear people saying we got to train more on soft skills, we got to build emotional intelligence, and those are pretty weighty things to just say, right? We need like actual, I think, ground rules for making someone more empathetic, making someone more capable of de-escalation. So I'm curious, as part of an organization that spends so much time really cultivating that next generation, more consultative agent, what are some of the keys to training there? But secondly, there's also the improvisational aspect too, right? It's not just about being super a great listener, a super warm person. That's the first part. The second part is using that listening, using that sense of empathy to actually make the customer happy. And as the issues get more complex, making them happy is going to be less predictable. It's going to require exceptions. It's going to require going above and beyond. It's going to require framing things in a new way. And so I'm curious how you start to also train people to be more improvisational while still recognizing some boundaries, some guardrails, and business interests as well.
Yeah, Brian, I think, the initial move toward training on empathy and EQ was simply to just apologize. I'm sorry that happened to you, or I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Uh, it doesn't come across as authentic to a customer. You mentioned it in your list of things. It's not everything, but listening first before really speaking, I think, is the first thing we have to do. But second, customers want to hear, I've got you. Like, I understand. I'm here. I'm on your side. I'm an ally of yours. This isn't about, a human working on behalf of a company that's kind of in this, standoffish relationship with a customer. I think it's more about allying humans to be on the side of customers and, hey, here's what I can do for you, given the bounds of, kind of the organizational policies.
Yeah, and I think that is a mindset shift to a degree, right? You definitely want to have a case where agents need to see their job as making the customer happy or at least solving problems for the customer. And I think oftentimes where one of the things that I despise as a consumer is when you get that note, hey, I was just doing my job. Sorry, I had to say no and was so rude to you. Like, I get it because I've worked in jobs where, you're not really given a lot of freedom to make the customer happy, but that strikes me as a cultural problem. It strikes me as an informational problem. If you think that the only person you need to make happy is the person who's signing your check, and the only way to make them happy is to follow policies to the letter, then you have a real cultural mistake. And I think shifting the thinking to it's actually a good thing if you hear what the customer wants and think about why the standard answer doesn't work for them and think creatively about how to reward them in the right way, or at least even if you don't feel like you have the power to do something, at least as an agent, know you want to listen, you want to learn, you want to get the information to let your team know, hey, what we're saying is not making these people happy. Let's rewrite the script. Let's rewrite the policy. Let's come up with something better. So listening both in the moment to really make the experience more personalized and more custom, but then also listening as a advocate for the customer, like you said, to learn what we as a business can do better and what I as an agent would benefit by being able to do because it would make my calls more harmonious. It would give me more chances to make an upsell effort. It would just allow for more opportunities for connection. So really great points there. Now, one final thing before we dive into more of the technology enablement side, we often talk about this pivot to a consultative agent, like I said earlier, as of course, every agent's begging for it. And of course, every agent's ready for it. And yes, in theory, humans are inherently empathetic. They're inherently more capable of connecting with people as people than a chatbot is. But if you're talking about the average agent who's been working in a contact center for 5, 10 years, who's only known how to read scripts and follow average handle time, they haven't necessarily been activating that internal empathy that they have. And so my question to you is, should we be focusing on just kind of taking our existing agents and training them on some of the things we've been talking about? Or is it more, do we need to hire a different profile, one who is more inherent, like more out of the box, more dynamic, more improvisational? What's your take on really the right agent profile moving forward?
It's absolutely both, Brian. Um, People who have served organizations for a long time. They have that institutional knowledge. That's irreplaceable. We always see that the longer tenured the teammate, the better they perform. That's never really going to go away. I think there is an element of helping them shift a mindset, you know, not just follow the process or policy, but understand why the policy and process is the way it is. Um, and then on the profile going forward, yeah, just you've already mentioned it really well, but looking for those who are adaptable, running through role play scenarios as part of the hiring process to ensure that we're um, getting people who have that, kind of, I don't want to say um, independent spirit, but ingenuity to go beyond in solving a problem. You want to make sure that everything is going to be kind of within the bounds and framework that you've established for your business, but the ability for an agent to think beyond just follow the process and how do I solve for what is really the root cause that a customer's um, interacting with us for. So there are a number of steps to get there too. Asking the right questions, listening in the right way. We can script every question under the sun, but knowing how to move between those and ask in an inquisitive way, that's what really sets great agents apart. And Brian, you mentioned it, so I'll kind of bring it back up here, but that listening process, not only having agents listen to the problem of the customer and having that customer feel kind of heard in the moment, but giving customers the confidence that their concerns are understood by the company as a whole and looked at as part of redesigning the customer journey and the customer experience. I can tell you personally, there have been times where I've talked to agents and I'm frustrated with a policy or process that a business has in place, and I provide a little feedback, but I'm not sure that it's ever passed along. I think that the great organizations out there have those monitoring and listening and escalation methods to collect feedback from their customers and act on it. I had a great interaction with a retail brand recently where they actually read the survey comments I placed on a second order and reached out to me about those. That was really going above and beyond and shows that they have that feedback loop in place.
Yeah, I think one, being able to show that you're listening, and I think that good human nature is something that we have to really emphasize. We have to emphasize that you as an agent, you are, like you said, an advocate for the customer. You have to care. And I think when you care, you start to ask the right questions, you start to hear them the right way, and you flesh out valuable information. But another thing you brought up that was really important is experience. So, like I said, it's very possible that the people who are in your contact center right now are not the most dynamic, conversationalists in the world, because that might not have been what they were hired for. But one of the advantages that humans are going to have over AI in the future of customer service is the ability to demonstrate their real world experience navigating a challenge, navigating a problem. When you can say, you know what, I know exactly what you're struggling with to pay that bill because I, as a customer for 10 years, or I, as an agent for the last 5 years, have seen this so many times. Here's a little tip that you can have. That's a good leg up that humans have from that real world experience of being able to walk in those shoes, being able to empathize not only with feelings, but empathize with context and empathize with, frustration, empathize with experience that they can share. So if we go back to what we talked about earlier, whereas the human can play that role in being the gap between what the policy says and what the customer really wants, the experience of knowing what those gaps are and how to navigate those, that's going to be so critical to the future of making an impact in the contact center.
100%.
So, do you want to, like I mentioned, pivot a little bit to technology, right? Because, right now we know that, we can talk all about culture and we can talk all about the fun stuff, but day to day, when you think of employee experience, one of the biggest drivers of satisfaction is the systems they use, the processes they have to follow, the technology they work with. If it's cumbersome, if it's 50 screens at one time, I don't care how many pizza parties you throw, they're not going to love their job, and that's going to trickle down to the customer. And that, of course, says nothing of the fact that they're going to be inefficient. It says nothing of the fact that if they have to look all this information up now when they're answering more simple questions, what's going to happen when the answer to that question is not in the knowledge base and they have to parse information from different sources to figure out the right answer. You're going to have a lot of inefficiency. You're going to have a lot of inaccuracy and inconsistency. So from your perspective, what is essential to really, what does a technology framework look like right now? And why is it so important to start to address this?
Yeah, Brian, that's a really big and broad question. We see kind of the typical CX tech stack uh, as being some combination of a CRM, a knowledge base, an LMS, and then a business is what I'll call core operating systems. And those core operating systems, they may be things that are homegrown, they might be off the shelf from a third party. Um, you know, they've likely evolved over time. And one of the biggest trends right now is, how do we adopt AI and layer it on top of all those systems? The biggest challenge is the interoperability of those systems. Can you plug into everything? Are APIs available? And data availability. How's data flowing across systems? Is it, um, do we have a single source of truth for things? Is it easy to understand where data resides, how it moves between systems? And then how easy is it to extract? The concept 10 years ago was, kind of this idea of a data extraction layer or data lake where everything could be pulled from. We've moved away from that to some degree. A lot of organizations still have that in place, and it's a great concept, but you know, companies that have grown very rapidly may not have that in place. And so we look for how can we easily expose data in their core operating systems and CX systems and make it available for AI to access as part of automating transactions. That's the biggest thing. The other piece of this is, on the human side, how do humans interact with all of these systems? The concept of a single pane of glass is not new. I think very few companies have really solved for it. But trying to simplify things for humans is always going to be paramount. And it's hard to say, what the kind of truisms are across organizations without knowing kind of the details. But as we look at design going forward, the big things are availability of data and interoperability across systems.
Now, not saying you're not necessarily saying anything new. I don't want to say groundbreaking is great advice, but the truth is, like, we've known that fragmentation is a big challenge, and we've known that unification is generally the solution. However, I think where organizations struggle is not with the concept; it's with the risks of taking action, right? Because we know that technology in this space evolves so quickly. 10 years ago when I was doing webinars, we weren't really talking about what AI meant for agents. We were talking about like what digital channels meant for agents. And then suddenly, things have greatly evolved. And so we know that they could evolve in a few years' time. We know that some awesome new startup could come out with an amazing platform that's going to revolutionize your customer service. And you're going to want to be thinking about migrating to that platform as well. We know that technology undertakings can be costly. They can require a lot of buy-in, a lot of internal deliberation, and that says nothing of the implementation, the training on the new tools, and all that. And so, given that there's a lot of steps to making technology work, and there's a lot of investment and capital and time involved, how should organizations navigate this landscape? How should they go from we know we have to unify, we know we have to grow, we know we have to improve, but I don't want to put all of our eggs in this basket and find out that basket's going to have some holes in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question here, or oftentimes it might be even more than that for organizations who are grappling with it. Um, I think it's really about understanding, number one, where we're currently at. What are the business challenges we're trying to solve for? Is this about automating certain processes, improving agent experience, improving customer experience, starting to evaluate those different dimensions and looking at what is our target operating model, what are the functions, policies, processes we're supporting with the technology, and then designing the technology to match. and I say designing technology, it might be anything from system selection, configuration, customization, or going through those build by partner decisions. All of those things I think are secondary. It starts with understanding where we're at, organizational goals, and really the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Organizations that lead with technology, some are successful in doing it, but they are those very product-centric SaaS organizations who are accustomed to building great technology. For those in other industries, leading with really business objectives and outcomes and what that operating model design should be, I think is the way to approach this.
Yeah, and I think more importantly, whether it's technology, whether it's about agents, whether it's about metrics, that emphasis on agility is so important. The emphasis on, our goal is to keep customers happy, to build relationships with them, and customers are fickle. They evolve, they change, both individually and then of course the generations of customers we deal with change as well. And so agility is the fundamental part of that. You have to think about, is what we're doing actually going to win over tomorrow's customer, not just today's customer? And I think if you have that mindset, you're going to approach technology and what is going to give us the most flexibility to change, to evolve, to get better. And that's really where you want to be as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely right, Brian.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's all you. We definitely want to hear your take on that.
Um, yeah, the agility is key. I think one of the big things, and you alluded to it earlier, is the fear of making the wrong decision. There's oftentimes this hesitancy to be a early adopter of a new technology until it crosses the chasm. But building teams that are willing to take a little bit of risk in, kind of siloed or isolated scenarios through pilots, is really a good way to dip a toe in the water, test out new technology, understand the potential ROI as it scales without committing a massive amount of resources. And that idea is nothing new, but I think it's especially important in the new AI world, is to realize potential risks before they manifest. We've seen these stories in the news about chatbots not having the right guardrails in place, or not having the right underlying knowledge content, not having gone through kind of rigorous red teaming, and offering airfares for a few dollars, or providing weight loss advice that is kind of off-brand for a company. These things have real impacts on a business's reputation, and those are the kind of things we want to look out for through small pilots that can limit the exposure of a business.
Yeah, and when it comes to making things happen, overcoming risks, there's always that risk or fear of not generating value. A lot of what we're talking about here is investments. It's investing in the future of the agent. It's investing in new technologies. It's investing in transforming our way of thinking to be more customer centric. And these are all, they make sense to us in this community because we've long embraced this notion of a value center, that when you have a great contact center and you have a great customer experience, you generate positive value for the business. You're not just a call center. But we also know that while we may take that for granted in our community, we know that outside the customer contact space, they're going to make you prove it. They're going to want to see like where this value is coming from. They're not just going to take the cliche. So as we start to wrap all this up here and we think about the evolving role of the agent, the technology that enables them, how do you see this consultative agent contributing to this notion of a value center for our organizations?
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned it. So, I'll kind of address the economic model. I think organizations will push partners, whether that is business process outsourcers like TaskUs or software partners, more toward actually putting their money where their mouth is and providing some real outcomes when it comes to automation. That the idea of outcome-based pricing is nothing new, but I think that'll gain a lot more traction. Outsourcers who are willing to kind of stake their pricing, their economics on those outcomes are going to be much more attractive going forward. Right now, not a lot of software companies are offering true outcome-based models. They might, the AI agent companies out there are saying, look, we have this great ROI, we have these great deflection rates. You'll only pay for contacts that are deflected. Um, it doesn't really take into account that total cost of ownership picture between the technology and the humans. So, moving toward those models like TaskUs is doing is going to be a great way to showcase value and provide real savings and shift the risk from the organizations implementing the technology toward the outsourcers. And it's going to put those who are able to understand the model into the driver's seat. And you mentioned the agent part of it too, Brian. I'll address that. We see that agent's role is going to shift. They're going to handle the more complex contacts, enabling them to do that in a way that's effective so that you can meet the CSAT guardrails that are in place to enable these economic models, is really going to be where the secret sauce is for organizations who are able to outcompete.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to really working with your partners, working with your stakeholders, working with or even your agents to understand what value looks like in this customer service context. Because if I see a fundamental flaw of this conversation, and this has been not only in the AI era, but it's really been around since we've been talking about this cost center to value center concept, it's this notion that they're going to generate upsells or cross sells. And suddenly, because they're having more of a conversation, they're going to sell more. And that should be true. And I'm sure that with the right training, with the right talent, with the right conversations, you will discover opportunities to close more deals and generate more revenue. But I think if you make that the whole focus, you again move away from, isn't our goal here to ultimately say that if we connect with customers, if we deliver a great experience, that's really where value comes from. When people believe in our brand, they're inherently going to want to buy more. They're going to inherently want to advocate more for us. They're inherently going to have fewer questions, which then creates more cost for organization. And so I think it's also important to understand the full picture of where value comes from, and then decide which of your agents is best suited for the customer retention effort, who has the right skills for the sales effort, who has the right skills for the just make people feel really, really good so they want to buy more over the long term. I think when you kind of really decide all the different ways value can be generated, one, you're going to really start to improve training, you're going to improve career pathing correctly. Two, you're going to hire the right profile. And three, you're going to find the right partner. Because ultimately, as we look at the future of outsourcing, as we look at the future of working with partners, there are going to be people who fill different purposes within your overall operation. And the one whose purpose aligns with what you're trying to achieve and how you generate value from the customer experience, that's the one you're going to want to work with. And so I think one who can really get that, can listen to you and can adapt to it and has the talent for it, that's going to be one that really helps you generate that lasting value and creates the best possible ROI on that investment.
You're absolutely right, Brian. You know, the impact goes two ways. It's those increase in upsell and cross sell opportunities. That's a component of it, but it's still thinking very transactionally. There are a couple different studies out there. I won't cite all the statistics, but I can give a range that it's somewhere between a 5 and 10 increase in NPS score. I guess that's redundant. A 5 to 10 point increase in NPS is going to result in a 1 to 3% increase in revenue based on whatever study you're looking at. Creating those happy customers creates a much bigger feedback loop than those transactional interactions where we're simply focused on another sale.
Yeah, and even if you focus on the sale, I think getting to the sale for the right reason. Like when the sale is like the more that you learn about this customer, the more you can recommend sources of value for their life. That's the mindset for selling. The mindset for selling is not if you hit X quota, we're going to give you Y reward. I mean, that's human nature, but I think if you're trying to build the right service culture and really have this consultative agent, being consultative is really listening to their problems and then making recommended actions, be it a service fix or be it a new purchase that will get them more value. So I think it all starts with having the right mindset, both at the top of your organization, within your partners, and of course on the front lines that they understand what matters. Now, on this notion of generating value, we also want to know that we don't want it just to be a situation where we've taken a few tasks, we've made those AI, and then we've taken a few other tasks, we made those humans. Ideally, we have a synergy where we're using them a balance between tech and humanity at every phase of the journey to maximize value for customers, to maximize value for the operation. So, what are some ways as we sort of wrap up here for you to think about, that kind of human and tech balance to elevating interactions? And of course, if you have any real world examples, that would be great to dive into as well.
Yeah, Brian, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it's giving people the ability to self-serve wherever possible. And there are, like you said, there are a lot of ways to do that through product design, through the overall kind of customer journey and pathway, through kind of external FAQs or KB articles, through a chatbot that is able to solve for those tier zero things. There's so many ways to better enable self-service. People have a penchant and their, population is getting trained to want to self-serve. It's oftentimes easier than interacting with a human, but where that breaks down, I think, is what we're getting at. How do we blend those two so that the interaction is kind of appropriate for the point in the journey and use it, and for the type of issue a customer may be experiencing, whether that is needing advice on products to make the best purchase, to closing that deal. That's where humans come into play best. After that purchase decision is made, tracking through toward usage and loyalty. You see that, kind of the those upfront decisions, whether that's recommendations that can be automated or through advisory from humans for those higher dollar interactions for actually getting a deal closed or making a sale. Those things require more of a human touch. But then the deep troubleshooting, those kind of things, again, always going to be use cases for humans. And we look at the end of the journey, which we haven't really touched on, but the loyalty aspect. Great loyalty programs, man, that's another world of technology where loyalty platforms can create real brand value, providing, kind of an extra human touch for those premium customers can generate deep loyalty, advocacy for a brand, and repeat purchase.
Yeah. So over the course of this discussion, we've talked about how the role of the agent has been and will continue to change. We've talked about, key tactics like being able to listen, being able to identify gaps between the fact-based answer and the more sentimental or empathetic one. We've talked about what role leaders play in cultivating the right culture, finding the right technology that can empower this. And then finally, we've talked about really thinking about when we put it all together, what does this mean for the customer and how can we create meaning to those journeys that not only solves a problem, not only makes a sale, not only reduces some stress, but leads to more meaningful loyalty. We're in an era where it's so much easier to enter a market than it ever has been before. It's so much easier to, promote your product than it ever has been before. And that intensifies competition. What that means is that you're not necessarily always going to win based on the most clever marketing gimmick or even the best product or price. You're going to win when people not only know they're going to get good quality of the initial product, but they're going to get a brand that cares about them behind that. And the agent is where that sense of care really comes from, as well as strategic deployment of AI. So we've covered a lot here, but as we part here, and kind of leave our audience out there to empower their own agents, any final thoughts you have for the audience?
Well, Brian, just in closing, I would say build flexibility into the framework for agents and humans. Allow them the latitude to be an ally, to solve problems on behalf of your customers. Build in the right guardrails and the right framework, but give them latitude at the same time so that in exception cases, they can go above and beyond based on a particular consumer circumstances. And that's how you're going to end up delighting customers.
Yeah, and I think the end of the day, it's if we are not letting them be human, if we're not letting them be adaptive, be listeners, be flexible, be empathetic, we're just overpaying for chatbots. If all their job is reading a script exactly as it was written and following the policy exactly as it was written every time and giving generic answers like, yes, I hear you, sorry you went through that, without ever taking the chance to think critically, without ever taking the chance to really connect with that customer, then we're not getting the most out of our agents. And most importantly, we're not doing the best for our customers and for our business. And so that flexibility, that empowerment to be humans, that desire to let agents cook, if you will, that is going to be the key to success. And that's going to be enabled by the right training, the right vision, the right technology, and the right partners. So thanks so much, Joe, to you and the TaskUs team for what's been a tremendous webinar here.
Brian, thank you.
Great. And for those of you listening, definitely we work with TaskUs on some reports you can definitely download. Definitely check them out for more material, more guidance, more expertise when it comes to the future of humans and technology as we try to elevate customer contact. On behalf of CCW Digital, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll talk to you next time.